Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine carrying a longing so deep it has become part of your breathing. You wake with it. You sleep with it. You carry it through every ordinary moment of every ordinary day, and no matter how many years pass, it does not leave. It sits quietly behind your smile when others celebrate what you cannot have. It rises in your chest when the question comes, the question people ask without knowing how sharp it lands. You have prayed. Oh, how you have prayed. You have whispered into the darkness of sleepless nights. You have wept in places where no one could see. You have wondered more times than you can count whether God truly hears a heart like yours. This is the story of Hannah, a woman who knew that ache intimately, a woman whose tears became a prayer, and whose prayer became a miracle, and whose miracle became a song that is echoed through centuries. She was not a queen. She held no great title. But she walked into the house of God with an empty heart and walked out with something even the powerful could not manufacture. She walked out with hope. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear them yet. My name is Hannah. And I want to tell you something before we go any further together. I want to tell you that I know what it feels like to love God and still feel forgotten by Him. I know what it is to sit in worship and feel a hollow space inside you that praise cannot seem to fill. I know what it is to look at the life around you, a life that by most accounts should be considered good, even blessed, and still carry within your chest a grief so private, so persistent, that you have stopped trying to explain it to anyone. That grief had a name in my world, and its name was emptiness. Not the emptiness of a woman without love. Not the emptiness of poverty or loneliness in the ordinary sense. No, mine was the emptiness of arms that wanted to hold a child and could not. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me show you the world I've lived in, so you can understand not just what I suffered, but who I was before the suffering shaped me into something I could not have become any other way. I lived in the hill country of Ephraim, in a town called Ramah, as you have never seen the hill country of Israel. Let me try to paint it for you in the only way I know, through what I remember seeing, smelling, feeling against my skin. The hills rolled gently in the morning light, covered in olive groves and terraced fields. The air in the early hours smelled of earth and dew, a clean, quiet smell that made you feel, for just a moment, that the world was new again. I loved mornings. I still do, in the way that people who have passed through great sorrow come to love simple, quiet things. The mornings asked nothing of me. They gave light without condition. They arrived faithfully day after day, regardless of what I was carrying. I found comfort in that. I found comfort in the idea that something in creation was steady, even when I was not. My husband's name was Elkanah. He was a good man. I want you to hear that clearly because it matters to understanding my story. He was not cruel. He was not cold or indifferent to my pain. He was the kind of man who noticed when you were quiet, who sat beside you without needing to fill the silence immediately. He loved me. He loved me in the way that good men love, imperfectly, sometimes clumsily, but genuinely. And in a world that offered women very little security of their own, his love was not a small thing. He used to bring me a special portion at the feast times. I still remember that. Every year, when we went up to Shiloh to worship and to sacrifice, he would set aside a double portion for me. Not because custom demanded it, because he wanted me to know I was seen. Because in his own way, he was trying to fill something that no human hand could fill. I understood what he was doing, and I loved him for it, but I also knew that love, as precious as it was, could not give me what my soul was crying out for. There was another wife. Her name was Penina. I will speak of her honestly because honesty is the only way this story makes sense. Penina had children, sons and daughters, a full and noisy household. The kind of life that, in our culture, marked a woman as favored, as complete, as having fulfilled her highest purpose. And she knew it. She knew that she had what I did not. And in the way that pain sometimes makes people reach for cruelty, not because they are entirely evil, but because suffering and insecurity finds strange expressions. She used what she had as a weapon. She would provoke me. That is the word the ancient record uses, provoke. It is a careful word, a word that holds more inside it than it shows on the surface. She would say things, small things, sometimes. Comments wrapped in the ordinary conversation of daily life that somehow always found the same tender place inside me. She would speak of her children when she did not need to. She would arrange them around her at the feast table with a particular kind of deliberateness that I always felt even when I tried not to. She would ask me questions that were not really questions. "Have you been praying, Hannah?" she would say, her voice soft, almost kind, as though she was genuinely inquiring. "Surely God hears those who are faithful," she would add, and the implication hung in the air like smoke. "Surely then, if he has not answered you, there must be a reason." I want to stop here for a moment, because I want to speak to anyone who is listening to this and who has known what it is to have a wound pressed deliberately by someone who knew exactly where it was. The cruelty of that kind of pain is not that it is spectacular, it is that it is so ordinary. It arrives in passing comments and knowing looks and the particular silence after certain words are spoken. It does not announce itself as cruelty, it comes disguised as conversation. And somehow that makes it harder to defend against, harder to name, harder to heal from, because the wounds are so small and so frequent that you almost begin to wonder if you are imagining them. I was not imagining them. And you are not imagining yours. Every year, we made the journey to Shiloh. It was the place where the Ark of God rested, where the tabernacle stood, where Eli the priest served at the entrance to the house of the Lord. The journey itself was not short. We traveled as a family, Elkanah, Peninnah, her children, and I, through the hills and valleys, through the dry stretches of road where the dust rose up in pale clouds around our feet. I used to look at the road ahead of us and think about what it meant to approach God. I used to think about whether the God who had made the mountains and the seas and the morning light, whether that God truly concerned himself with the grief of one woman walking through the dust with an ache in her chest. I wanted to believe he did. But belief, as you may know, is not always a steady thing. Sometimes it is solid beneath your feet, like stone, and sometimes it shifts like sand. And you step carefully because you are not always sure which it will be. Shiloh was alive with people when we arrived. There were families from across the region, pilgrims who had made the same journey. All of them gathered for the same reason, to worship, to sacrifice, to remember who they were and who God was. The sound of it overwhelmed me sometimes. The voices, the animals, the smell of smoke from the offerings, the sense of collective faith that moved through the crowd like a current. I walked through it all and felt both part of it and separate from it. Part of it because I too loved the Lord, because I too had come to seek his face. Separate from it because even in a crowd of worshipers, grief can make you feel profoundly alone. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever stood in the middle of something beautiful? A gathering, a celebration, a moment of collective joy, and felt the particular loneliness of carrying something inside you that no one around you seems to understand? That was Shiloh for me. Every year, Elkanah would make the sacrifice. He would give portions to Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. And then he would turn to me and he would give me a double portion. And every time he did, I felt two things at once. Gratitude, genuine, warm gratitude for a man who saw me and tried to honor what he saw. And grief, a grief that sat just underneath the gratitude and reminded me that no portion of food, however generous, was the thing I actually hungered for. He would look at me sometimes with a kind of helpless love in his eyes. "Am I not worth more to you than 10 sons?" he once asked me. He meant it tenderly, he meant it as comfort. But the question held within it a misunderstanding that I could not explain to him without hurting him. It was not that he was not enough. It was that the longing inside me was not about him at all. It was something between me and God, something that only God could address. And I was slowly learning that what I needed was not a different husband or a more patient heart or a better attitude about my circumstances. What I needed was to stop trying to manage my grief quietly and take all of it directly to the one who had the power to do something about it. That realization did not come to me all at once. It came slowly, the way light comes into a dark room when someone opens a door, only a crack at first, slowly, tentatively, but real. And it was building in me on the night that would change everything. The night I finally stopped performing my pain politely and let God hear what was truly inside me. That night is where we are going. But I need you to understand what I was carrying before I can show you what it meant to set it down. Because the miracle is more beautiful when you know the weight that preceded it. The freedom is more real when you understand the years of the cage. Stay with me. We are just beginning. And I promise you, the God who heard my prayer hears yours too. Even now, even in the quiet of wherever you are as you listen to these words, He hears. There is something about waiting that changes you. I do not mean that as a comfortable observation. I mean it as a truth that has edges to it, that cuts in unexpected places, that demands more of you than almost any other experience I know. Waiting is not passive. People sometimes speak of waiting as though it were a kind of rest, as though the woman waiting is simply standing still while life moves around her, untouched, unaffected, simply ... patient. That is not what waiting is. Waiting is an active, daily, sometimes exhausting choice to keep believing in something you cannot yet see. It is waking up in the morning and deciding, again, to trust. It is lying down at night and releasing the day into hands you cannot feel but have chosen to believe are there. It is refusing day after day to let unanswered prayer become the final word about who God is. That was my life for years, many years. And I want to tell you about them honestly because I think there is something sacred in the ordinary days of waiting. Something that gets lost if we only tell the miracle and skip over the middle. My earliest memories of marriage were not filled with sorrow. There was a sweetness to the beginning. Elkanah was attentive, affectionate. Our home was small but cared for. I cooked in the evenings and listened to the sounds of Ramah settling into quiet, the distant call of a neighbor, the wind through the olive trees, the soft lowing of animals in the fields nearby. I loved my home. I was a woman who paid attention to small things, the texture of bread dough beneath my hands, the particular way afternoon light came through the window and fell across the floor in a long, warm strip. The smell of rain approaching, that green electric smell that comes just before the first drops fall. I noticed things. And in those early days before the weight of the waiting had fully accumulated, I noticed them with a kind of gentle gratitude. I was happy in the incomplete way that humans are often happy, genuinely, but aware that something was not yet whole. When the months passed and no child came, I told myself it was simply a matter of time. This was not unusual. I knew other women who had waited seasons before their first child arrived. I told myself I was simply one of them. I prayed, quietly, and with what I believed was a calm and reasonable faith. Lord, I would say, in the early days, if it is your will, let me conceive. I trust your timing. I trust your timing. I said those words easily then. They had not yet been tested. They were faith in the way that faith is easy when it has not cost you very much yet. Penina arrived in our household sometime in those early years. I will not rehearse the pain of that again, except to say that her presence changed everything in ways I had not anticipated. It was not simply that she had children and I did not. It was that her fertility became, in the architecture of our household, a kind of daily mirror held up to my lack. Every morning, every meal, every ordinary moment of life together, the mirror was there, and I looked into it whether I wanted to or not. There were days when I managed it, days when I could move through the house with a steadiness that surprised even me. And there were days when I could not. Days when some small thing, the sound of a child laughing, the particular way Penina called her son's name, the sight of a mother's hand reaching automatically for a child's face, would break through the steadiness completely. On those days, I would find a reason to be outside. I would walk to the edge of our property or sit beneath the olive tree at the back of the garden, and I would let myself feel what I was actually feeling without performing composure for anyone watching, and I would pray different prayers on those days. Less orderly prayers that were mostly questions. Why, Lord? Why is this close to me? What have I done? What am I missing? Is there something in me that disqualifies me from this blessing? I want to pause here and speak to you directly, because if you are listening to this and you have ever prayed those kinds of prayers, the why prayers, the what did I do prayers, I want you to hear this clearly. Those prayers are not a failure of faith. They are faith in one of its most honest forms. They're the prayers of someone who has not given up, who is still talking to God, still turning toward Him, even when the turning is painful. The Psalms are full of those prayers. David prayed them, Jeremiah prayed them, Job prayed them, and I prayed them, and God did not reject me for it. He was not waiting for me to get my questions under control before He would listen. He heard me in the questions. He heard me in the confusion. He was never once absent from those conversations beneath the olive tree, even when His silence felt like absence. That is one of the things waiting taught me, that silence is not the same as absence, that the God who is not answering is still the God who is present, still the God who is working, still the God who has not forgotten your name. The years continued, and with each year the prayers shifted. They became deeper, less polished. More desperate, yes, but desperation is not always a bad thing in prayer. Sometimes desperation is simply what it looks like to finally take your needs seriously, to stop softening it at the edges so it seems more manageable, and to present it to God in its full, raw reality. I began to understand slowly that my quietness before God had been its own kind of holding back. I had been bringing Him the edited version of my grief, the reasonable version, the version that said, I trust you and I understand if the answer is no, and I will be fine either way. But the honest version, the full, unedited, unwashed grief that I had not yet given Him. I had been trying to be a good, patient woman, and there is nothing wrong with patience, but I had confused patience with suppression. I had been swallowing what I should have been surrendering. There were feast times that I remember as particularly dark. Times when we would arrive at Shiloh and the worship would begin and Penina would begin her provocation. And something inside me would simply give way. I could not eat. I would sit at the table with the food before me, good food, more than enough, and I could not bring myself to eat it. Elkanah would notice. He always noticed. Hannah, why do you weep? He would ask, why do you not eat? And I would try to explain something that resisted explanation, because it was not one thing. It was not simply that Penina had been cruel, though she had. It was not simply that another year had passed without a child, though it had. It was something larger than any single cause. It was the accumulated weight of every year of waiting, every morning of hoping, every night of releasing hope, every prayer that had gone up and come back as far as I could tell without an answer. It was the weight of all of that pressing down on me in the middle of what was supposed to be a celebration, and I did not know how to explain that weight to Elkanah without sounding as though I was rejecting his love. So I often said very little, and the food sat untouched, and the evening passed, and eventually we would rise, and we'd carry the weight back to where we were sleeping and lie in the dark and look up at nothing and breathe. Just breathe, because sometimes breathing is all you have. But God was doing something in me during those years that I could not see at the time. I understand it better now, on the other side of it. He was hollowing me out, not cruelly, not carelessly, the way a potter hollows out clay before placing something inside it. He was making room for a kind of faith I could not have had if the answer had come easily and quickly. Room for a depth of prayer I would never have found if desperation had not driven me there. Room for a surrender so complete that when I finally came to it, I gave him not just my request, but my heart. And I gave him Samuel before Samuel was even born. That is where we are going, to the moment of surrender, to the prayer that changed everything. But first I needed to exhaust every other option. First I needed to reach the end of my own management of the situation. First, I needed to arrive at the place where there was nothing left to try and no one left to lean on and nothing left to do except fall directly into the arms of the only one who had ever truly been able to help me. I was almost there. The night in Shiloh was coming. And on that night, the woman who had been quietly carrying her grief would finally let God have all of it. Not the edited version, all of it. I remembered the particular quality of the evening before it happened. There was something different about the air, or perhaps it was something different about me, the way that the world looks different when something inside you has shifted, even before you know what the shift is. We had eaten, or rather, the others had eaten. I had again been unable to touch the food. Penina had said something that evening. I do not even remember now the exact words. What I remember is the feeling of them landing, the familiar, precise sting. And something in me on that particular evening did not absorb the blow quietly and continue on. Something rose up, not in anger toward Penina, though. I had felt anger before and perhaps felt something close to it then. No, what rose up in me was a kind of determination, a decision made somewhere below the level of conscious thought. Enough of carrying this alone. Enough of presenting this grief to God in careful, managed doses, as though I were afraid of overwhelming him. Tonight, I was going to take it all to the house of the Lord. Every last piece of it. I rose from the table while the others were still eating. The evening was settling into dusk around the tabernacle compound. The light was going gold and then amber and then deepening toward the blue of approaching night. I walked toward the entrance of the house of the Lord. My feet knew the way, even when my mind was barely tracking the details of the journey. I was weeping before I arrived. Not the quiet, composed weeping of a woman trying to maintain dignity in a public place. Weeping in the way that you weep when you have finally stopped worrying about what you look like. Weeping in the way that comes from somewhere very deep and does not ask permission before arriving. I came before the Lord, and I did something I had never quite done before. I opened my mouth and let what was inside me come out without filtering it first. No carefully chosen words, no attempt to sound theologically correct or spiritually mature, just the raw, unadorned truth of what I was carrying. Lord of hosts, I use that name intentionally. Lord of hosts. The God of armies, the God of power, the God who commands 10,000 angels. Because I needed to speak to someone big enough to hold what I was bringing. Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look upon the affliction Of your servant, I called myself your servant, because that is what I was. Not perfectly, not always gracefully, but I had tried to be faithful to him. I had tried, through all of it, to keep turning toward him. If you will look upon my affliction, if you will truly see it, truly see me and remember me and not forget me. If you will give me a son, and here is where my prayer became something I had never planned to say. Here's where my desperation and my faith collided and produced something neither one of them would have produced alone. Then I will give him back to you, all the days of his life. He will be yours, completely yours. A Nazarite to the Lord, set apart, given back to the one who gave him. I want you to sit with what I just said. I want you to understand the weight of it. I was not asking God for something and planning to keep it safely in my hands once I had it. I was asking God for the deepest desire of my heart, the thing I had wept over for years, the thing whose absence had nearly hollowed me, and I was already, in the asking, releasing it. Before I had it, before I knew he would say yes, before there was any evidence at all that the prayer would be answered. I was surrendering the answer before the answer arrived. That is not natural. That is not something a person is able to manufacture from their own willpower or their own spiritual maturity. That was something God had been preparing in me through all those years of waiting. The waiting had done its work. It had broken every other option. It had stripped every other hope. So that when I finally came before him that night, I came with nothing in my hands but the truth. And the truth was this: I cannot do this without you. And if you give me what I am asking for, I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never forget where it came from. I was weeping so deeply, praying so earnestly that my lips were moving, but no sound was coming out. I was speaking to God in the only language that was left to me in that moment. The language of a soul at the absolute limit of itself. And then I heard a voice, not God's voice, Eli's. Eli, the priest who had been sitting by the doorpost of the temple. He had been watching me. "How long are you going to be drunk?" he said. "Put away your wine." I felt the words land. There was a moment, just a moment, when I might have collapsed inward from the shame of it, mistaken for a drunkard, in the house of the Lord. At the most naked, vulnerable moment of my life, it would have been very easy to simply crumble, to apologize and back away and take my grief somewhere it would not be seen or misunderstood. But something held me upright. I turned toward him. "No, my lord," I said, "I am a woman troubled in spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink." I spoke clearly, not defensively, not with anger, with dignity. "I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman. For all this time, I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation." I want to pause here because I said that to a priest in the house of God. And I was not ashamed. I was not ashamed of my grief. I was not ashamed of the depth of my need. I was not ashamed that I had been weeping and shaking and moving my lips without sound, bringing the fullness of my anguish directly to God, because anguish brought honestly before God is not a failure. It is worship. It is one of the most genuine forms of worship, the worship that costs you something, the worship that knows it cannot come before God pretending to be other than what it is. Eli looked at me, and something in his face changed. "Go in peace," he said, "and the God of Israel grant your petition that you have made to him." That was all, just that. Go in peace, and may God grant what you have asked. I want to tell you what happened inside me when he said those words. Something released, something that had been clenched somewhere deep in my chest, in a place I had almost stopped being aware of because it had been clenched for so long, released. Not all at once, but genuinely, really, like a rope that has been pulled taut for years and is finally allowed to go slack. I did not have the child yet. There was no evidence yet that anything would change. Eli had not promised me anything. He had simply spoken a blessing. But something in me received it. Something in me chose to believe it. Not because I was certain, but because I had nothing left but trust. And I had learned in all those years of waiting that trust does not require certainty. Trust requires only a decision. A daily, sometimes hourly, sometimes minute-by-minute decision to lean toward God instead of away from Him. I made that decision standing in the entrance of the house of the Lord as the night finished falling around me. I went back. I sat at the table and I ate, and my face was no longer sad. That is the phrase the ancient record uses. Her face was no longer sad, not because everything had changed in the external world. Everything was exactly as it had been before. Penina was still there. Elkanah was still there. My womb was still closed, but something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I had given it to God, not the polished version, not the edited version, all of it. And in the giving, something had been returned to me. Not yet the child, but peace, real peace. The peace that Paul would write about centuries later, the peace that passes understanding. The peace that does not make sense given the circumstances. The peace that is not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of God in the middle of difficulty. I had that peace now, and I ate, and I rested. And I waited, but a different kind of waiting now. Not the waiting of a woman hoping against hope in the dark. The waiting of a woman who has placed her request in the hands of someone she trusts. There is a difference between those two kinds of waiting, a profound and life-changing difference. And I was living in it. In the morning we rose early. We worshipped before the Lord, and then we made our way back to Ramah, back to the ordinary rhythms of life in the hill country, the morning chores, the sound of the wind through the olive trees, the light coming through the window and that familiar long stripe across the floor. But something was different now, not in the world around me. In me, I prayed differently. I moved through the days with a quieter mind. Not because the longing had disappeared. It had not. I still wanted a child with the full depth of what I had always wanted. But the wanting was no longer what defined me. The surrender had shifted something. I had put the request into God's hands, and I had chosen to leave it there. I want to talk about what it means to leave something in God's hands, because I think we say it more easily than we practice it. We place our requests before Him, and then we pick them up again, and place them again, and pick them up again. We're not fully to blame for this. It is a human thing. We're made to act, to solve, to manage. Releasing control goes against something deep in our nature. But true surrender is not a single act. It is a practice. It is choosing again and again, when the anxiety rises, to open your hands instead of tightening them, to say, again, I trust you with this. I chose that again and again in the months that followed. Some days it was easier than others. Some mornings I woke with the peace intact, full and warm. Other mornings I woke with the old familiar ache and had to make the choice all over again. Trust. I trust you still. Again, I trust you. And then one morning, I knew, before there was any outward confirmation, before I had spoken to anyone or been told anything by anyone with knowledge of such things, I knew, the way a woman knows. Something had changed. And in the privacy of that knowing, before I had said a single word to Elkanah or to anyone else, I sat in the quiet of the morning and I wept. Not from grief. For the first time in years, not from grief. I wept from something so different that I could barely identify it at first. Gratitude. The particular undoing that happens when you have waited a long time for something and then it arrives and it is more than you could have held in your mind while you were hoping for it. He had heard me. He had truly heard me. Not the composed version, not the patient version, the weeping, shaking, lip-moving, poured-out version. That version, he had heard it, and he had answered. The months that followed were unlike any I had ever lived. There was a new quality to the mornings, a new awareness of the life that was growing, hidden from the world, but not from me, not from God. I thought often during those months about what I had promised. I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life. The words had come from me in a moment of desperate surrender. But now that I was holding the promise from the inside, now that there was a child growing, a child who would have a face and a name and hands and a laugh and a way of tilting his head, the promise took on a weight it had not had when I made it. Was I afraid? Yes, I will be honest. There were moments when I held the reality of what I had promised and felt the fear of it move through me, because it was one thing to offer God a hypothetical. It was another to offer God someone you had held in your arms, someone whose smell was familiar, someone whose cry you knew before anyone else did, someone who had become, without any effort at all, the organizing center of your entire heart. He was born, and we named him Samuel, because I had asked the Lord for him, because his very name would be a lifelong reminder. God heard every time someone called his name, every time he answered to it, every time I said it in the ordinary moments of ordinary days. God heard, God heard, God heard. There is a particular grace in naming things after their true story. We often give names to our children or our experiences that reflect our hopes for the future. But Samuel's name reflected something different. It reflected the past. It reflected the record. It said, "This is what happened." I cried out. And he heard whatever came next, whatever Samuel would become, whatever his life would hold. The beginning of it was undeniable. God had heard a woman weeping in a dark temple entrance with nothing left but trust. And he had answered her. I wanted that truth written into his name. I wanted it to be the first thing he heard when the world spoke to him. God hears. The years with him at home were both the most beautiful and, in a way, the most quietly painful years of my life, because I knew, every day I knew, I was borrowing time. I was living on the grace of a gift that I had already promised to return. Elkanah was gentle with me about it. He supported the vow. He affirmed it. He was a man who understood that what had happened was not simply a domestic event, but a sacred transaction. But he also loved Samuel. We both did. And love, as you may know, does not make surrender easier. If anything, it makes it harder, because you cannot surrender what you do not care about. The depth of the giving is inseparable from the depth of the love. I nursed him as long as I could. I treasured every ordinary thing. The way he reached for my face with small, certain hands, the weight of him against my chest in the early mornings, the sound of his breathing at night, that soft, steady sound that said, "Here, here, here. He is here." I memorized him, not deliberately, not in the self-conscious way that someone memorizes because they know they're about to forget, but naturally, the way you absorb the things you love into your skin, into your breathing, into a place so deep in you that you could not point to it on a map of the body, but you know it is there. Samuel was in that place. He still is, and always will be. But I had made a promise, and I was a woman who kept promises. Not because I was strong. I want to be careful here. I do not want you to hear this story and think I was some unusually heroic woman whose faith was so extraordinary that she found it easy to do what she did. I was not extraordinarily heroic. I was a woman who had been shaped by years of waiting into someone who understood, at a level beneath words, that everything comes from God. Every breath, every morning, every child, every good and perfect gift. If it comes from him, then returning it to him is not loss. It is the completion of a circle. It is placing back into his hands what was his from the beginning. That is what I told myself on the days when the fear rose. That is what I told myself when I looked at Samuel's face and felt the fullness of what I was being asked to do. This was never only mine. He was always also his. The time came. When Samuel was weaned, when he was old enough, I began to prepare. I baked bread. I gathered a skin of wine, an ephah of flour, offerings for the Lord, and then I gathered Samuel. And we went up to Shiloh, to the same tabernacle where I had wept, to the same entrance where Eli had watched me and thought I was drunk and then spoken a blessing over me. We went back. The road to Shiloh felt different this time. Every time I had walked it before, I had been carrying my grief on the journey. The grief came with me in my luggage, as it were, packed in alongside everything else, heavy and familiar and always present. This time I was carrying something else, something I was walking toward the act of releasing, something I loved beyond my capacity to fully articulate. Samuel walked beside me some of the way. He was young, but already so himself, already with the particular quality of attention and quiet that would one day mark him as a man of God. I looked at him walking, and I saw everything all at once. The child I had prayed for, the promise I had made, the years of waiting, the night of weeping, the moment the peace arrived. All of it compressed into this small, beloved person walking through the dust beside me. We arrived at the tabernacle. We brought the bull for sacrifice. We brought the flour, the wine. We fulfilled the requirements of the offering. And then I took Samuel by the hand, and I went to Eli, and I said, "Do you remember me? I am the woman who stood here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed. And the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." I want you to notice the word I used, lent, not abandoned, not given away in the cold sense of surrendering something unwanted. Lent, because he was still mine in every way that love is real and lasting. A mother's love does not end because geography changes. A mother's love does not dissolve because she releases what she loves into a larger purpose. It persists. It prays. It follows in the invisible, powerful way that prayer follows people across any distance. Samuel was lent to the Lord. He always would be mine in the way that love makes permanence. And he was the Lord's in the way that purpose and calling make belonging. Both things were true. I left him there. I left him with Eli in the house of the Lord, and I walked. And I did something that surprised me. Something rose up in me that I had not anticipated. Something that was not the grief I had been braced for, not the hollow devastation I had perhaps feared I would feel when the moment arrived. Something else. Something warm and upward moving. Something that started somewhere in the center of me and rose. And before I fully knew what was happening, I opened my mouth and I sang. My heart exalts in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. There is none besides you. There is no rock like our God. I sang about the God who raises the poor from the dust, who lifts the needy from the ash heap, who makes the barren woman to keep house and to be a joyful mother of children. I sang because something in me knew that what had just happened in that tabernacle courtyard was not an ending. It was the opening chord of something much larger. Samuel's story was not over. Mine was not over. The God who had heard me in the dark was still the God who was writing the story, and the story was good. Even the parts I had not yet read, even the chapters I could not yet see. Every year after that, I went back to Shiloh, Every year I brought Samuel a little robe. I made it myself. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, I would sit and work on the robe, measuring the cloth against my memory of his arms, his shoulders, guessing at how much he had grown since the last time I had seen him. I want you to think about that. A mother measuring love by the size of a robe. A mother expressing in needle and thread what words could not fully hold. It was the prayer I could make tangible. Every stitch was a blessing. Every seam was a covering. Every robe said, I see you even from a distance. I am still here. I still love you. I am still yours in the way that mothers belong to their children. And God was good. Eli blessed Elkanah and me. He spoke words of favor over us, and in the years that followed, God gave me more children. 3 sons, 2 daughters. A house full of the life I had once so desperately longed for, not as a consolation for what I had given, not as a reward in the transactional sense, but as further evidence of the character of a God who gives abundantly, who does not honor sacrifice with scarcity, who does not reward surrender with emptiness. And Samuel, my Samuel, he grew up in the house of the Lord. He grew in stature and in favor with the Lord and with men. He became the voice that called Israel back to God in one of the darkest seasons the nation had ever known. He anointed kings. He heard the voice of God and spoke it plainly. He stood in the gap between a nation and its God and said, Here I am. Speak. I am listening. Where did that willingness come from? I believe he learned it very early, long before he was old enough to understand it fully. I believe he learned it in the moment his mother carried him to the temple. He learned it in the robe she made every year. He learned it in the act of being given to God, wholly, without reservation, by a woman who had herself learned that nothing held too tightly remains yours, and nothing surrendered to God is ever truly lost. I want to speak now to you directly, to wherever you are as you listen to these words. Maybe you are carrying something, a longing, an unanswered prayer, a grief that has gone on longer than you thought you could bear. Maybe you have been bringing God the edited version of it, the composed, patient, theologically correct version, and you have not yet given him the real one, the full one, the weeping, desperate, lip-moving, poured-out version. I want to tell you, bring that to him. He can handle it. He is not fragile. He is not waiting for you to arrive with a polished prayer before he will lean down and listen. He is already listening. He is already present. He is already aware of the weight you are carrying. What he is waiting for, if waiting is even the right word, is for you to stop managing it alone and place it in his hands. All of it. The why, the how long, the I don't understand, and I am exhausted, and I am almost out of road. Bring him all of it, and then stay. Stay in his presence long enough to let the peace come. Not the peace that makes the circumstances different. The peace that makes you different while the circumstances are still the same, that peace is real. It was real for me in the entrance of that tabernacle, and it is available to you right now, in the entrance of whatever moment you are standing in. And if you are carrying something that God is asking you to surrender, if there is something in your hands that you sense, he is asking you to open your hands and release. I want to speak to that too. Surrender is terrifying. It is one of the hardest acts of faith a human being can perform, because it requires trusting not just that God is real, but that God is good. Good enough to be trusted with what you love most. Good enough to hold it more carefully than you could. Good enough to take what you offer him and make something of it that you could never have made on your own. I surrendered Samuel, and God made him a voice that shaped the history of a nation. I could not have done that for him. No amount of holding on could have accomplished that. Only releasing him to the one who knew what his life was meant to be. There is a prayer I want to leave with you. It is not a complicated prayer. It does not require special words or a particular posture. It only requires honesty. Lord, here is what I'm carrying. I am not going to pretend it is lighter than it is. I am not going to pretend I have it managed. Here it is, all of it. I am placing it in your hands. Not because I have figured out how to stop caring about it, but because I trust you more than I trust my own grip. You are the Lord of hosts. You command 10,000 things I cannot see. You knew me before I was formed. You have not forgotten me. I am going to choose to believe that. Again, today and tomorrow if I need to. As many times as it takes, because you are worth trusting. And I am learning, slowly, imperfectly, but truly, how to trust you. Amen. My name is Hannah, and I want you to remember one thing from my story. The God who heard me in the dark hears you too. He has never stopped listening. He has never turned away. He has never seen your grief and looked elsewhere. He is the God who leans toward the broken, who sits with the waiting, who receives the prayer that has no words left, and honors it with the same attention he gives to the most eloquent petition ever offered. He is that God, and he is yours. If you believe in the power of this story to touch the heart and transform thoughts, sign up now. Together, we can bring these teachings to those who haven't had the chance to hear.